There are different biblical scholars who belong to different schools of interpretations, who have different exegetical frameworks. And what school of interpretation you're a part of is going to go a long ways to determine how you interpret this thing. And so I thought it would be fun to just have a little check-in opportunity. And like, I don't know that we necessarily need to make everybody share, but if you want to share, like, you know, which of these camps that you see here, so this is, I'm still in Revelation part 2, because we didn't quite finish. I'm on basically the last page. There's a little tiny bit of spillover. Which one of these do you find yourself kind of identifying with most? Are you a praetorist, thinking that these horsemen and apocalyptic images represent some specific and concrete things that occurred or were on the horizon of occurring in the first century? Are you a historicist who thinks that there's probably some projection in the future, although not quite a multiple millennia wide projection? Are you a millennial dispensationalist or futurist who thinks that we're describing events that have not yet taken place?
I don't know.
What do you think?
I don't know if any of them. I don't know if I'm any of them. I mean, there's no secret I use Bible commentaries and study Bibles. But, I mean, I've got 2 Bibles here. At home I got probably 4 or 5. And I don't think the commentaries, any of the commentaries say the same thing.
Yep, that is the waters we have waded into.
And, it seems like you go from the earlier copyrights to the later, it gets more progressive and inclusive to everybody instead of just the Jews. When we get into today's lessons, 144,000, some people see that as very specific.
Right.
So I don't know, but that's not unusual for any of the Bible as far, since I've been studying with you, I've studied, I'm getting into more of the Greek and Hebrew words. But some of these verses, I mean, even from the New Revised and NIV, those change of, just change of one word.
Sure.
Changes the whole meaning.
Changes the whole context of the chapter or the verse.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I want to give everybody else a chance to share their thoughts, but I do just want to interject that this one observation, that this is a big part of the reason why I am not a fan of using the Bible to browbeat people into your way of thinking, into doing what you want people to do or expect of them. That model of Christianity doesn't work well for me, and that's such a big part of why. Right? Because how you choose to translate one little word can make a huge difference in the meaning of the text. And so those people that go out there and like, everything you're doing is wrong, and I know it's wrong because it's right here in the Bible, like, some of those are not quite as black and white, clear cut as we,
He or she doesn't preach the Bible.
Right.
I've never understood that, he doesn't preach the Bible. Well, what Bible doesn't he preach?
Right.
Which one?
Right. Yeah. But that's absolutely a really good observation. I don't know, what's anybody else think?
I mean, I don't know. Truly. And I don't know. I wonder if it isn't written so that each individual individually takes it to heart. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Rather than talking to a collective group, but it's trying to tell you what your life can entail.
Kind of like a parable.
More
Different for everybody, just
more like a lesson that you can look at and see. I don't know. mean, I don't know her.
Okay?
Not only is that different today, but it could be different, you know, that's probably different than what you looked at it 10 years ago. Might be different when you look at it 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
It
It can be
doesn't say the
different
same
tomorrow.
thing, it doesn't say the same thing.
It can be different tomorrow. I read a verse that spoke to me very firmly right now, and tomorrow I can't find it.
I think for us, well, we missed the last one, she was 4 days old at the time, so we're
Right.
a little bit behind anyway. I think what I would like to kind of go with is the one where he was kind of talking about things that were happening then or more immediately, just to kind of think everything's already wrapped up, or if all the loose ends are already tied, and, you know, and not that that's the way I believe, it's like, that'd be kind of a nice one to go with, it's kind of like, you know, all these things that maybe don't sound so
That
nice,
is-
they're already done.
That is probably the more reassuring interpretation, certainly. That's the one to be a little bit more comfortable with, you know, as we'll get into with chapters 7 and 8 tonight. You know, we have a prediction, you know, which I think is a symbolic, but still, when you're seeing a prediction of 1/3 of the land will burn, 1/3 of the sea will die off, 1/3 of the stars in the heavens will go out, you start to get, okay, I really prefer if we can set this entirely in the past, then that's a little bit reassuring, yeah.
We kind of thought it was like when stuff happened in the future.
Sure.
And like, until like we started this Bible study, like I never even questioned that, so it's been nice thinking about it in different ways.
But yet you can see it, why people think it's here and now. I mean, it's happening right now.
Sure.
I mean,
Much of it you can put to.
Who is in church on Sunday?
huh?
Who is in church on Sunday? Everybody? Everybody was in church on Sunday, right? I think so. There's a line that I have used many times, which I chose to use in my sermon on this particular Sunday, but if you hang out with me for long enough, you'll hear it again, because I'm fond of it. The stories in the Bible are true, not because they happened at some point in history, but because they continue happening today. I think the intellectual part of me, right? The part of me that's like trained in Bible scholarship leans towards this relates to first century circumstances. Because when you approach this from a scholarly point of view, making it about the present is less supernatural than making it about the future, right? If it's about the future, then that means that there's at least some supernatural element of the ability to see into the future, to project your awareness into the future. That's a supernatural ability that we human beings do not ordinarily possess. And so if you're looking at it from a strictly academic perspective, that's one that makes a lot of sense. You know, John could just look at the world in his immediate vicinity and maybe make some projections, you know, in the same way that we can project that probably in the next 2 years we're in for a recession, just because there's things out there indicating that, right? We could also be wrong. That's just a good guess. That's an educated guess, right? But I really think that personally, I'm sort of in a both and rather than an either or camp. I don't think that it's just about the events of the past, nor do I think it speaks to past and to present, and will probably speak to future as well. Like, this is sort of an ongoing question, an ongoing struggle, right? That apocalyptic eschatology. What will it take to get our messed up world straightened out? That's part of the question that Revelations is addressing and tackling. And John came up with an answer for a first century audience, but that is a question that is still being asked in the 21st century, right? What's it going to take for God to straighten out this mixed up world that we're in? Yeah. So I just thought that was a fun little activity there. I don't think we quite finished reading chapter 6, so we'll knock out that last little section. Oh, I removed my bookmark? For shame. Why would I do such a thing? Or at least I found a reason to believe. So, we still have to read the 5th and 6th seals. If somebody would like to read 9 through, let's just read the whole thing, because I'm eager to get started on new material. I'm trying to find the right pace of what we can get through tonight. So I'll start. So this is chapter 6, verse 9. This is where we left off. We didn't quite get this wrapped up last time. When he opened the 5th seal, who's he?
Jesus.
Jesus, right? The Lion of the tribe of Judah. We have not had the name Jesus explicitly stated yet, but we have the Lamb and the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? You remember, no one was found to be worthy to open the seals, and so he starts weeping, and he says, no, check it out. Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they had been given. Remember, that's a major motif in Revelations. Martyrdom, right? This is when the Christian church starts getting persecuted for real for the first time in history. Is about like the time that this is being written. Unfortunately for them, it's going to be a few more decades yet before that ends, or a century or so. They cried out with a loud voice, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth? Remember again, judgment, major theme in apocalyptic literature. It's less judgy in the Gospels, but come the apocalypse, very much judgmental. They were each given a white robe, which we remember as right, white robe, purity, righteousness. We've seen that before. And told to rest a little longer, until the number would be complete, both of their fellow servants and of their brothers and sisters, who were soon to be killed as they themselves had been killed. When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and there came a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth, the moon became like blood. The stars in the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll rolling itself up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the magnates, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So, like I said, we've got that theme of martyrdom again. We've got the martyrs who are given white robes, and they're asking Jesus how long before, we got punished, we got persecuted, we were killed for believing in you. How long are you going to let that go on? And the reply comes back, just a little while longer yet. The time isn't fulfilled. And so you think about what's happening in history. This is certainly a message of hope, even as it's an acknowledgement of really nasty stuff happening in the present, right? It's not a promise, oh yeah, that's going away tomorrow. But it is a promise that at some point it's going to happen. And then the 6th seal, all the signs and all the portents. Right? That was in our gospel reading for this Sunday. Dreadful signs and portents in the heavens. Like when the sky itself rolls up like a scroll, you know something is up. Something's going on. You just kind of like look, and every sign of impending doom is there. I was reminded of that Murphy's Law, right? Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Like in this case, it's everything that could be a sign of impending doom appears as a sign of impending doom. There's not really much left in the way of, you can't miss this, right? Can't miss that. I also pointed out that that's filled with references to the 2nd chapter of Joel, especially verses 30 and 31 of Joel, talking about basically the lights going out in the heavens, the moon becoming like blood and the sun becoming dark. That's straight out of Joel. And so again, remember that's another one of those themes in Revelation that we have, is that he loves to go back and borrow apocalyptic language from Old Testament prophets, especially Daniel. Daniel comes up a lot, Ezekiel comes up a lot, Joel not so much, but here Joel makes an appearance. Any thoughts, any questions about this passage? I guess I do also want to point out, I didn't put this in the study guide, but did you notice, like, there was definitely an emphasis on who was afraid. Did you catch that? Then the kings of the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slave and free, right? That feels to me like a tiny little addition to, right? And that's another one of our ongoing themes in Revelations. If Jesus is Lord, then Caesar is not. If Jesus is the Son of God, then Caesar is not, right? And again, we can transpose that to the present tense, we can transpose it to the future tense, right? What it's ultimately about is that ultimate authority on heaven and in heaven and on earth belongs to God. And that all other authorities on earth are answerable to God. Kings and magnates and generals, the rich and the powerful, are not any safer than anybody else. In fact, they are especially named as going to run and hide. Probably because they don't get real consistent in answering to God, would be my guess. Any other thoughts or questions or anything before we get to new material? All right. Going once, going twice. We'll jump into some new material. So we're going to just try to do these 2 chapters at a time because I think we can get done on time, maybe even a little early for our new parents who would probably appreciate that. And our old parents who would appreciate that. So, chapter 7. Does somebody want to just start reading until we decide it's time to stop reading? Let's just read that first paragraph there, first 3 verses. That seems like a good place to stop and talk.
Okay, I can do it.
Or, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm totally making this up as I go. Or we could read the whole chapter, process it ourselves, and then look at my notes and my study guide. What do you want to do? Who's interested in trying to do the work without the study guide before referring to the study guide, and who wants to just keep referring to the study guide?
I guess I thought that second meeting we had,
I did recommend that everybody read 7 and 8 before coming here tonight. I don't know if everybody did their homework. Has everybody read 7 and 8 already?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can just read it.
All right, let's just do the study guide version. I think that'll be quick.
Okay.
All right, so just read the first 3 verses, then we'll stop and chat. Were you going to read it out loud?
I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
meant.
let's read chapter 7,
Okay,
1
God's
through 3.
people will be preserved. When I saw the 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds from blowing upon the earth. Not a leaf rustled in the trees, and the sea became smooth as glass. And I saw another angel coming from the east, carrying the seal of the living God. When he shouted out to those 4 angels who had been given the power to endure land and sea, "Wait, don't hurt the land or the sea or the trees until we have placed the seal of God on the foreheads of the servants." And I heard how many were marked with the seal.
We're going to stop right there. So, we got all the signs, all the portents, right? The sun went dark and the moon turned to blood and the sky, like, that was where we ended at chapter 6. It's on now, right? All the signs are in place, revealing that the wrath is going to come. We're going to have a little pause. So we have the number 4 repeated there several times. Did you catch that? I mean, in the first verse alone, the number 4 appears 3 times. 4 angels at the 4 corners holding back the 4 winds. And then in verse 2, called out with a loud voice to the 4 angels who have been given power to damage earth and sea. So we got that number 4. Clearly significant because it's happening 4 times in 2 verses. Where have we heard that number 4 before?
For living creatures.
4 living creatures. What was that?
We got 4 horses.
We also had 4 horsemen, yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about the 4 horsemen as I read that, because we are told explicitly, right, in verse 2, the 4 angels who had been given power to damage earth and sea. And so this might be the 4 horsemen, or somehow related to the 4 horsemen. Like, these 4 angels have been given authority to mess some stuff up on earth. And they are told, wait, don't mess anything up just yet, right? That's what we get. We get this little timeout. It's like kids when they're playing tag or something. Timeout. Timeout. We're gonna stop. I don't know what's about to happen, but we're gonna stop. Right? The destruction that was in the immediate horizon is put on hold. Why is it put on hold? Until we have marked the servants of our God with a seal on their foreheads. So first we are going to mark the servants of God. Does this remind anybody of anything?
And all this destruction is also being done by
Passover.
angels,
Yes, all this destruction is also being done by
which
angels.
is different from the Old Testament, where the angels intercede.
Well, they do both.
Yeah.
Because if we look at, what were you saying it reminds us of?
Passover.
Like, that was explicitly in Exodus chapter 12, an angel that comes to slaughter the firstborn of every household in Israel. Like, that should be hopefully an immediate connection. Like, this path, right? We put the blood on the doorposts, and the angel of death is going to pass you by. If you don't have the blood on your doorposts, you're going to lose the firstborn. In the same way, there's some sort of mark that we got to get on the people, because we don't want to get everybody, right? This is not blanket destruction on the planet. Some people get an exemption. Some people get passed by because they have the seal on their foreheads, marked as servants of God.
That was supposed to be the last, one of the commentaries, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Ta,
Is the,
was the mark.
oh,
X or a plus.
okay, interesting. Where does that come from?
If I have the one in my hand. The background, see Ezra 9:4, where the mark was the Hebrew letter Ta,
Oh, okay, so they're making a connection to Ezra.
made like an X or a plus.
Okay.
And Ezra does say something about being marked also.
I did not make that connection to Ezra, so that's good to know. Just say, I didn't see anything in this text itself that led me to believe that, and so they're referring back to Ezra, right? Another one of those Old Testament prophets that we keep flipping back to. Let's see, so, let's keep going here. Let's go, how about I read, because I have some idea of where I want to stop. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, right? So here's the number of the people who actually get that mark on the head, the seal, who get the Passover mark. 144,000 sealed out of every tribe of the people of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 sealed. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. Tribe of Asher, 12,000. Tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. Tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. You get the gist of it. After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hand. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb. Okay, here's some people who get a pass. Thoughts about that? Questions about that?
Our Methodist minister in Aberdeen was one that believed that 144,000 is a fixed number, and that's all that's gonna go for the living. And that he was sure that he was one of them.
Well, good for him.
That's positive.
That's about lottery ticket winning odds at that point, so I'm glad that he was confident.
But, it's the 12 tribes of Israel, kind of.
Yep, kind of. You'll note that this is,
Dan's gone.
yeah, you'll note that this is a little different accounting. So the 12 tribes is a little bit tricky. Jacob has 12 sons, and those 12 sons get a tribe named after them. Only sort of. Because when it comes time to actually enter into the promised land and get the land divvied up among the 12 tribes, Reuben has lost all claim to land because he slept with his,
Father concubine.
yeah, that's probably the easiest one. I'm like, is that the stepmother? Not really, because there was also, like, it's not like he divorced and remarried, it was like, he had 2 wives and 2 concubines, so, he slept with one of his father's women. How's that? So Reuben loses the right to a place in the land, and Joseph of Technicolor Dreamcoat fame, the one who was the grand poobah in Egypt, he has 2 sons with a woman from Egypt, and rather than giving him, Joseph, a chunk of land, his 2 sons each get their own chunk of land. So of the original 12 sons of Jacob, 2 are not represented among those who get land. Reuben is not represented because he loses claim, and Joseph is not represented directly because it's his offspring. So it's a second generation. It would be Jacob's grandchildren at that point.
Joseph is, he's the last one, or second to last.
Right, but here in this one, Joseph does get land, and Reuben does, or not get land, but Joseph and Reuben are both named as people whose tribes get 12,000 saved from.
But also one of Joseph's sons,
But also one of Joseph's sons is in that list. That is correct.
and one of Jacob's sons is missing.
Right. So, what are we to make of that? My best guess is that we have reached a point in history where Christianity is distinct enough from Judaism that when John sat down to write this, he didn't check his facts very carefully and did not actually work off of one of the 2 lists from the Older Testament. I'm guessing that was an oversight rather than intentional. If you think it's intentional, I'd love to hear your theory behind why those 2 were left out and the 2 that were included. But like I said, it kind of depends on what list you're looking at.
The more conservative of the commentary says Dan was left out because of worshiping idols. That the tribe of Dan worshipped idols.
Between the time they settled the New Testament in the Promised Land and by the time that they're occupied by Romans in Jesus' day, everybody has succumbed to some idol worship at some point. I'm not sure exactly which specific story, because like the whole kingdom of Judah gives into, the whole kingdom of Israel gives into idol worship at various points in their history. But maybe Dan did something especially egregious. I'm not sure what specifically they're referring to.
And then he says that they included Joseph's son just to get to 12 again.
That's very possible. And that's significant. So I am definitely not of the camp that 144,000 is a fixed number. because 12 is a highly symbolic number in the Bible. It's much like 40 days and 40 nights. It doesn't necessarily mean an actual 40 days and 40 nights. It's symbolic, right? When we get the 40 days or 40 years in the wilderness, right? When we get that number 40 in our Bible, it always is indicative of a time of testing and trial and difficulty before emerging into something new. Right? It's exactly what I was preaching about on Sunday. It's the rough patch you got to go through in order to enter into new life and new growth and new creativity. And right. So from my perspective, 12 is a highly symbolic number of a completeness of the people of God. Right? When we have the 12 tribes of Israel, we're talking about the whole of God's people. When Jesus selected 12 apostles, 12 disciples, he is doing so to represent that he is reaching out to the whole people of God, right? That wasn't a fluke that Jesus came up with 12 disciples. It was his way of saying that he wants to reach everybody, that he wants his message to be complete, right? That nobody doesn't hear his gospel. Everybody hears his gospel. So in this case, I think that this is a way of Revelation saying all of those people of the chosen ones, the people of Israel, all of the people of Israel who are supposed to be saved, get saved. In other words, not one is lost. It's sort of, to me, the 12 of 12,000s is a way of emphasizing that number of 12, and it's just sort of like Jesus' way of talking about the 99 sheep and the one, right? Not one is going to be lost. Every single one of those who is destined for salvation is going to get it. God doesn't miss anybody when God's gathering up the people who are saved.
If you get into the numbers, the churches were really small. The churches weren't large.
What do you mean?
I mean, there weren't a lot of Christians.
Oh, sure.
And here, some places says it's like 1.5 Christians per 1,000.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, right? We might look at this, and if we're looking at this, boy, I hope this isn't literal, right? Because on a planet where there are over 1 billion Christians just right now who are alive right now, not to mention any Christians who have died and gone before, right? It really is getting into like hitting the lottery odds if you are one of those 144,000 out of all the Christians who have ever lived and who are alive today and who will live in the future. That's pretty slim pickings. But that's a really good observation, Joe, is that at the time that this was circulating towards the, right around the year 100 AD, that probably feels like a really big number to them. They're like, wow, 144,000 people. That's a lot of people, I actually, and we'll keep going, but I actually think that this, so let's do keep going through the study guide, right? So I've written here, right? I think that this is a biblically significant number 12, which represents the whole people of God, like the 12 tribes of 12 sons. So then 12 times 12 is just further emphasizing the 12. It's like super 12. Much in the same way, right, the story of Jubilee, right? There's the Sabbath year, and then there is the Sabbath of Sabbath years that comes up after every 49 years has gone by. Right, so if you're not familiar, there's this. It's in the Old Testament where every 7 years you're supposed to not plant, but you are supposed to let the land go fallow for that year. You're free to harvest what grows naturally, but you're not supposed to till it. And you're not supposed to plant it. You give the land itself a Sabbath year, every 7th year. But then Jubilee is this thing that comes around every 7th year, where the same thing applies, but you're also supposed to cancel all debts, release all slaves, and return all land back to its proper owners according to the 12 tribes, the way the land was divided among the 12 tribes. It's sort of the master economic reset button for the people of Israel. So in the same way that 7 times 7 is just super 7, 12 times 12 is super 12. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is there also the story like how many times should I forgive my brother? It's like
Right.
7 times 70 or something like that. And so like, you count down like 400.
Right, exactly, that's a metaphorical number. In fact, one of my favorite, I love that story because every time somebody brings that up, I immediately remember this cartoon where it's the disciples asking Jesus that question and Jesus giving the answers, and then one of them replies, "Great, now I have to do math." And underneath the caption says, "Forgiveness, it's easier than doing math." Right, but you're exactly right, like 70 times 7, it's not a literal, once I hit 490, all right, you get forgiven, but that was your 491st strike, you're out, you know, it's meant to be just a big number, right? But then when we get to verse 9, we get the 144,000 plus a bunch more, right? After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count. So your Methodist pastor can be aware that even right there, even if the 144,000 is literal, there's a whole big tack on to the 144,000. There was a multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne, for the Lamb robed in white with palm branches in their hands. So we get this great big bonus group of people. Again, white robes, you should be getting used to this. This is purity, this is righteousness, this is also martyrdom. Right, major themes that we're getting. Palm branches in their hands. Palm branches represented victory, because when the Roman army would return victorious to the city, people would line up on the sides of the street and wave palm branches to hail the victorious conquerors returning home. Which, by the way, think of the implications as to how Jesus was welcomed into Jerusalem. For those who are keeping track of the reasons why Jesus was executed, it was not because he was a really loving guy. Like, that drives me crazy when people say that, like, Jesus taught so much love that the world couldn't handle it. No. It wasn't because he just put out so many warm and fuzzies into the world that people freaked out about all the warm and fuzzies and killed him for it. Like, step one, right? If Jesus is Lord, Caesar is not. If this Jewish rabbi rides into the capital city and receives the same welcome that the Roman army would receive, ooh, Rome is not going to like that one bit. Right? They're rolling out the same welcome for Jesus that they roll out for Roman soldiers, Roman emperors. Yeah. But yeah, so the palm branches is a symbol of victory. Like I said, they're waved when Roman armies return home in victory, and hopefully you'll think of that next time we have Palm Sunday. And then verse 10, we have more praise music, because that happens every once in a while in Revelations. Everybody has to fall down and sing some sort of praise God song. In this case, salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb. Does somebody want to jump in from verse 11, which is where I stopped, to verse 14, 11 through 14?
Okay, and all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures.
Anybody remember how many elders there were?
4?
Nope. 4 living creatures.
Oh, 12.
24.
24.
12 and 12 again.
Okay, so they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? Is that where? 14?
Yep, go ahead, keep going. Yep, this next verse.
I said to him, Sir, you know. Sir, you know? And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. I love that last line.
Well, part of the reason why we love that last line is obviously symbolic, right? If you dip your robe in blood, white is not the color it is going to come out if we are talking about literal robes and literal blood, right? It will not come out white if it is
So
dubbed.
what do you have?
So, I pointed out, right, so verse 11, we've got the elders and the 4 living creatures showing up again, right? They've been with us since back in chapter 5, I think is where they first showed up. The 24 elders and the living creatures. And they also have to fall on their faces and praise. And so I said, more praise music, right? We need to. And I also wanted to point out, right, that this perpetual praise keeps coming back to that motif of God is the ultimate authority in the universe, which means that the worldly authorities, right, your Caesars, your kings, your presidents, your, right, whatever worldly authority you want to name, they are subject to, subservient to, right? We judge our worldly leaders based on our understanding of God. Their authority is only legitimate insofar as it is consistent with God. Right? So that's why I said, remember, who is being praised is political as well as spiritual. We tend to lose that meaning when we're in a Christian-dominant country, society. But if you're a fringe group in an emperor worshipping, like literally there was a cult of the emperor who thought he was God, like if that's the country you grow up in, this is significant. It's political. And we are asked the question, who is the multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, right? That's the one of the 24 elders says to our friend John, who is getting this whole, right? That's who's still writing. It's John's revelation, John's vision that he's getting. One of the 24 elders asks him the question, so who do you think these people are with their white robes that are hanging out? This, right? The people that we just saw back in verse 9, the multitude that no one could count. And as John so often does in Revelations, says, I don't know, but you do. That seems to be a standard answer. And the elder replies, these are they who have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So again, we have this theme of martyrdom, right? They have come out of the great ordeal, the great tribulation. I don't know what other translations we got out there, but they got through some rough stuff, right? Martyr not necessarily in the sense of killed, but martyr certainly in the sense of they have been persecuted for the sake of their faith, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about they have come out of the great ordeal. Remember, persecution is an important historical context of Revelation. So they have been persecuted. They remained faithful through the persecution, and they have come out of it. There are scholars who will disagree with me on this point, but I look at the 144,000 from the various tribes of Israel. His accounting is not quite consistent with the Older Testament, the 2 places where the 12 are listed. But I think that the 144,000 is that way of acknowledging that the Christian faith has grown out of the Jewish faith, that we have a Jewish Messiah, that we have scriptures that speak to the people of Israel as being God's chosen people. And so this Christian writer is saying that there are a number of people who are going to be saved who are Jewish, who come out of I think that's what the 144,000 is about, is that speaks specifically to the salvation of Jewish people. But then in verse 9, we also get this, but in addition to the fact that God is going to be saving a whole lot of Jewish people, there, right, and I don't think it's a literal 144,000, I think it's the completeness of the Jewish people who God intends to save, right? God doesn't lose anybody who's destined for salvation. Then we also get into this great big multitude, and the fact where it says here in verse 14, right, so we're still talking about those people. Who are these robed in white? So we're talking about that multitude with the palm branches and white robes that we encountered in verse 9. And the response to who they are is they are those who have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So this then is the Christian church. This is the Christian church. How do we know this? Well, number one, it is not confined to a specific ethnicity. just like the Christian church is not defined to not confined to a specific ethnicity, right? By the time that John's writing, there are Roman Christians, there are Syrian Christians, there are Ethiopian Christians, there, right? Like, all around the edge of the Mediterranean, there are Christian churches springing up in the major cities. I mean, it's still not pervasive, it's not a huge thing, it's not a political force, it's not huge, but it's there all around the edge of the Mediterranean. So it encompasses a lot of nationalities, a lot of ethnicities, a lot of languages. And that's something that was so big in Paul, right? That for you there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, neither male and female, right? So that's how I would interpret this, is that we have the 144,000 speaking specifically to, there will be those people of God from the people of Israel that God made this covenant with, clear back with Abraham and Promised Land and Moses, right? Like, our Christian writer is, even though we're now at a point in history where those two paths are pretty well diverged, right? The Christianity has basically become a religion that is distinct from Judaism. Our Christian writer is still nevertheless acknowledging the very Jewish roots of his religion. The fact that he's got a copy of the Old Testament sitting next to him that he can quote from when he's doing his apocalyptic language, right? When we're quoting from Ezra and Ezekiel and Daniel and Joel. So that's how I would interpret this. So our multitude is the Christians. Our 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes is the Jewish folks. And then I'll just read this last one because there's not a whole lot more to it, but it's more praise music, right? For this reason they are before the throne of God and worship him night and day within his temple. And the one who is seated on the throne will shelter him. They will hunger no more and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So, we are told what their reward is going to be. They stayed faithful through the tribulation, right? In the midst of persecution, they stayed faithful. What is their reward? They don't have to deal with persecution ever again. They don't have to deal with hardship ever again. Right? All of the hardships of life, it's like you have gone through your stuff. Now you can be exempt from any future stuff. Right?
One of my commentaries, probably is just this one too, I found really interesting. Again, it goes back to the root words, and it says that all 16 times that temple is referred to in Revelation, the word designates the inner shrine, not the temple as a whole.
Right.
Where God lives.
Right.
Where they believe God lived. In the tent, who built his tent,
Right.
was an allusion to the wilderness, wandering.
Right. Yeah, so if you're not familiar, right, the temple basically had like 3 levels to it. You've got an outer courtyard. Anybody who wants to come to the outer courtyard, like you all get a free pass. That's the place that was getting to be a little bit market-like, and it was more of a public space than a temple, really. Everybody's welcome. I mean, yeah, you can come, you pray, you give offerings and those sorts of things, but everybody's welcome. Then we have a deeper inner temple where only Jewish people are allowed to go. In fact, I'm about 90% sure, without checking myself, looking it up somewhere, I'm pretty sure it was just Jewish men were allowed to go. The women were not permitted into this inner part. So you had to be Jew, you had to be a man, and you had to be 100% clean. Like, you had to have checked all the boxes from the holiness code, right? About what you can and can't eat, what you can and can't wear, what you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot touch. Like, you had to have checked all those boxes. And then the innermost is the place where only the priests are allowed to go to offer incense to God, because that is the place where God dwells on earth. Like, that's God's space. So you get these sort of increasing levels of exclusiveness as you get inside. So that's really interesting that's the temple, right? But you think about what's the distinction about that part of the temple. Well, that's the place where there's no longer any physical barrier between you and God. And that's exactly what we're getting in this vision of John in Revelation, right? Like the physical barrier between us and we are face to face with God. Let's see. All right, so let's move into chapter 8. So we had a pause, remember? All the signs and all the portents, 6 seals of 7 have been opened. It's gotten dark and blood red moons, like all the signs are, it's on now. It's coming. But we have the timeout, right? Angel calls timeout. I'm on T. That's what the kids say. I'm on T. Because we need to mark some people. These are the people that are going to be safe. These are the people who have been faithful Jews. These are the people who have been faithful Christians. And because of their faithfulness, they get the seal. They get the Passover, right? They get the exemption. But we've done that, so now we get into chapter 8. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. I think that's like got to be the eeriest line, right? Because all that we have heard so far from John is that the only thing that's going on in heaven, more or less constantly, is somebody is singing praises to God. It's all right, now it's your turn to sing praises to God. All right, you got those praises sing, great. Now it's your turn to sing praises to God. All right, now you angels over here. Now it's your turn. All right, now you elders. All right, now you martyrs. Now, right? They're just, like, it is non-stop singing happening going on. And the 7th seal is opened. For half an hour? And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. I made the note here. We had talked about the 7 spirits who were before the throne and what that represented, and there's different scholars who think different things. I think this is maybe some evidence that the 7 spirits who are before the throne are in fact the 7 archangels. Because these 7 angels, we are told, are also standing before God, right? Because both of the times that we heard of the 7 spirits in earlier chapters, they were always described as the 7 spirits who stand before the throne of God. And here we have 7 angels who stand before God. So it's very possible that these 7 angels that we're talking about in chapter 8 are those 7 spirits that we were talking about back in chapter 1 and chapter 4. For those of you who are curious, I listed the 7 angels as they appear in the book of Enoch, which is another kind of apocalyptic book that did not make it into our Bible. You won't have read the book of Enoch unless you went out of your way to read it. I mean, it exists. You can go out there and get it. It might be in my Bible because I have a pretty complete apocrypha, but I haven't read the book of Enoch either because it's weird. I'll leave it at that. It comes from some legends that were developed by some rabbis based on this really obscure passage in Genesis where it talks about the sons of God lay with the daughters of men and gave birth to a race of giants. And it's like just this weird random little side note that happens in the book of Genesis. And it's just weird enough that somebody went out and was like, that's weird, that the sons of God lay with the daughters of men and gave birth to a race of giants. Let's flesh that story out a little bit. That sounds like an interesting story to tell. And so that's where you get the book of Enoch. But in the book of Enoch is the first place where you get 7 archangels. The Catholic Church has a different set of 7, but that's the first and most popular place where we come up with this idea of 7 archangels is in the book of Enoch, and that's their names. But anyway, that seems to be some evidence that the 7 spirits of God are not like the 7 gifts of the Spirit, but or the 7 gifts that are talked about in Isaiah, but they're the 7 archangels. Another angel with a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given a great quantity of incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar that is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. So this refers back to, we already saw this, the incense carrying the prayers of the saints up to God can't remember where we saw this, maybe I wrote that down. Oh, there you go, 5:8. This is the first place that we saw that, chapter 5, verse 8. Good for me for writing that down. And we're told that there is a great quantity of incense, which suggests that these prayers are definitely getting heard and responded to. These are some powerful prayers. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. There were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So here we go. We have the prayers of the saints combined with fire from the altar that's before the throne of God getting chucked straight down into the earth. This signals the beginning of judgment. Right? We have the prayers of the saints. What have the martyrs been asking for every time they've showed up so far? How long, God? How long are you? When are you going to judge? When are you going to avenge? How long are you going to let this tribulation and persecution go on for? How much longer, God? That's the prayers that keep coming up from the saints. God, do something about it. Don't let this persecution go on anymore. Well, now we have the prayers of those saints mixed with the fire from the altar of God getting chucked straight at the planet. The prayers are going to get answered, judgment comes. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets were made ready to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were hurled to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea became blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers, on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many died from the water because it was made bitter. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light was darkened. A third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise the night. What do you think of that? Anybody? Thoughts? One of the things that I'm reminded of here is the plagues of the Older Testament, right? Of the story of Moses. These aren't quite matching on a one-to-one basis of the plagues that the Egyptians suffered, but very much this idea of some striking down from heaven on a large scale is reminiscent. I think the number of the 1/3 is significant in that it indicates significant but not total destruction. Right? If you lose a third of a population, that population will probably rebound. But if you lose a third of the population, that hurts. That is not an insignificant event. You know, if a third of Custer were to die off, the town of Custer would probably survive, but that would be a cause of much devastation and weeping and wailing, and like that's significant. That's pretty big. I also felt like I had to point out, for those who are terrified of this, that it must be in some sense metaphorical. Because it turns out if you take away a third of the sun's mass, we lose some planets. Like, it doesn't work that way. You can't just take a third of the sun away and have the planets continue to revolve around the sun anymore. Like, we get into some... It's a lot more than the reduction of light and heat from the sun that we have to worry about. It's the fact that we will go hurtling off into space because the sun that is holding us in orbit stops holding us in orbit, right? Just wanted to throw that out there, that if we make this too literal, it just doesn't work anymore, right?
But it kind of reminds me of the dinosaurs. mean, something huge happened.
Oh, sure, you think
So,
about like,
I mean, something,
Star
yeah, I
fell
mean,
from the sky.
star falls from the sky and a third is destroyed, yeah. It also makes me think of absinthe, but that's a different, anybody? No? Wormwood is the key flavoring ingredient, that's why you have a
We're
different.
good, baby, think.
Yeah, that's,
Screw tape letter.
oh, also that, yeah, also the screw tape letters. If you have not read the screw tape letters, it's delightful. Highly recommend reading the screw tape letters. Yeah, it's one of C.S. Lewis's books. It's this really fun way that he does theology because it's written from the perspective of the demons that are trying to get Christians into hell. And so it's sort of like theology in reverse, right? It's the cautionary rather than what ought you
this is a
do.
delightful book.
I thoroughly enjoy it.
I mean, C.S. Lewis is not the easiest thing in the world to read. The screw tape letters are pretty easy. I mean, it's the same guy that wrote Chronicles of Narnia. I actually got, Ruth and I got to see an off-Broadway production of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, kind of cool.
So yeah, we have a third, basically a third of everything, right? We got the earth, we got the sea, we got the waters that are fresh waters, and we got the sky. Third of everything's gone. We covered all of our bases, right? And insofar as we think of our world and where it is and what its limits are, we got a third of the land, third of the salt water, third of the fresh water, third of the sky. That's it. That doesn't leave you really anything left that didn't lose a third, right? Which again, I think the third being symbolic of significant but not total devastation, right? We have survivors, the world's gonna go on, but not like it was going on before. Anything else that we want to talk about with that? And again, just my little one piece of reassurance is that this cannot be literal, because we lose the planet just goes hurtling off into space and a third of the sun disappears. So don't take it too literally, but it still should, even if it's not like literal, the purpose of this is scary, right? It is significant, widespread devastation and destruction. That's your takeaway. I kind of actually like the comparison with the star falling from the sky and wiping out the dinosaurs, right? Like, there were probably some dinosaurs who at least initially survived the impact of the meteor, but the world was so transformed that within a certain era of time, all the dinosaurs had gone extinct and mammals had started to take over, right? It transformed the planet. It was transformative. It was that level of devastation where things cannot go back to where they were before. I think that's what we're getting at here. It's not intended to be a literal, these events will take place, but it is intended to be an apocalyptic image that you should read loud and clear as widespread devastation and destruction so that things cannot go back to the way they were before. It doesn't represent the end of everything, but it represents the end of something.
So can we, maybe I'm jumping the gun, I'll just wait.
All right, I got one more verse, because then we'll wrap up our...
Okay,
Verse 13, then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew in mid-heaven. Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, at the blasts of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow.
Yeah.
Oh, right, like that, like you want to talk bummer, right? An eagle, and I'm not sure if that eagle is meant to refer to one of the four living creatures. You remember that an eagle was one of the four living creatures that we had. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be just a random eagle. I'm more inclined to think it's one of the four living creatures, just because it seems weird that a random eagle would show up and say this.
yeah.
That's like,
That makes more sense.
who is this eagle
Sounds
that just
like
showed up?
eagle.
Like, who's this eagle that just showed up to say some stuff? I'm guessing it's one of the four living creatures, because remember that when we talked about the four living creatures, we sort of, in much the same way that these four devastations sort of cover all the aspects of life on earth, right, with the sea and the air and the land, we talked about how the four living creatures kind of represent all life on earth, because we have the predator, the prey, the sky, and humans, right? So I think that this is our sky being, gets to be in the air, makes a really good announcer.
I just noticed when from the versions, this one, this is the SRV, right, is middle heaven. NIV is mid-air. The Message is middle heaven. I mean, I know that people this time saw 3 levels, heaven, earth, and
Oh, yeah, so there's that.
middle
No,
heaven.
no, right, so we have the heavens, and then we have the heavens, you know what I mean? Like, you can talk about I think of it more like, probably a good analogy, if this isn't a good analogy, right? You have the atmosphere, and then you have everything, right? So when you look up, you can see that there's more going on up there than what we interact with. Even if you're a person living in the 1st century who hasn't quite figured out what's revolving around what, and what's a sphere, and what's flat, and what's light years away and actually enormous versus what's up, right? Even if you haven't pieced all those pieces together, it is very obvious even to children that there's some stuff in the sky that's close enough that it has an effect on us, right? We got those clouds, the clouds make shade, the clouds make rain, like the birds are up there, but then there's this whole other thing going on past that, right? So think high atmosphere. In the world, but above the world. Other than that, I'd have to look at the Greek to. I do not have the Greek text in front of me.
It just one of those things, it didn't make
Yeah.
any sense. It just
Mid-heaven's a weird word that we don't account. Yeah, it seems random, but that's our takeaway, right? Boy, if you thought that was bad, I ain't seen nothing yet. You had a question. That's it for my study guide.
Yes.
We kept that a
So-
reasonable amount of time and actually
Yeah,
finished.
So usually you bring it back to the frameworks, the pederast and
Oh,
the stars.
okay.
Usually bring that.
So what do we think there?
Well, okay, future.
I still think, I feel it's still in the historic part of it.
So,
But most of it is still going on like the first and second hand, so I'm trying to figure out.
right, so pretty clearly, whichever framework you are employing, John is speaking about events in the future. Even if we put this back in the 1st century only framework, he might be predicting something that's 50 years or 100 years off, you know. So let's,
But even when you look at it that way, if, in reading it today, it still goes back to the, already but not yet.
that's a really good way of looking at it. If we were to pick this apart and look at the major themes that are going on, like what was it, do you remember, that initiated this destruction? What finally set it loose? 7 seals were opened, but what was the catalyst? The prayers of the martyrs, rising up to God, saying, how long, O God, how long will you continue to let your people suffer? How long, O God, will you continue to let your church be persecuted? When, God, are you going to do something about it? Those prayers are mixed with fire from the altar, and it's thrown down to heaven, and it's game on. I think, insofar as I tend to read this as the both-and approach, right? I think that John is speaking to a very specific audience of the Christian church that existed at the time that he was writing, but the way that I think that, like all of Scripture really, it continues to speak to us today, is that this is not so much like The idea of a third of the planet being wiped out is terrifying to us. But what's really happening here, big picture, is there is suffering in the world. There is suffering among God's people. There is suffering in God's church, right? In this case, it's the very real historical persecution of the Christian church by the Roman authorities. In our case, that's, at least specifically in our case in this room, that's not to say that persecutions of Christians isn't happening in the world around us, but it's not really happening in the United States, right? If the worst persecution that we get is somebody tells us happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, that is what we call first world problems, folks. But do we not still have pains? Do we not still ache? Do we not still look at the world in which we live and sometimes, overwhelmed with what is going on, cry out to God, how long, God? How long are you going to let this keep happening? How, right, I mean, for whatever your thing might be, like for me, it's like, how long are we going to continue having school shootings be a weekly occurrence in this country? How long do we have mass shootings become only newsworthy when the body count gets to a half a dozen or more?
Like genocide.
Right. How long are people going to continue starving to death on a planet that produces more than enough food to feed every person?
But yet you can still, I can vision, of course, being raised out of Ellsworth, I can vision 1/3 of the world being destroyed. I mean, all it takes is a few nuclear weapons.
I am not going to say that this is not potentially literal.
And lose one-third of your sun to a nuclear winter.
Sure.
1/3 of your sky. I mean, there are forces in this world where this could happen. I mean, you can see them.
Absolutely.
Where this could happen.
So it's like a warning, like you gotta get it together.
Well, but I think that warning has been through all time.
That's what I'm saying. It's there, he's still, we're still working.
We're saying, how long is it gonna take for divine justice? God is saying, how long are you stupid people gonna keep doing what you do?
Well, and then we're starting to get into what's our eschatological framework, right? Are we employing an apocalyptic eschatology like Revelations, or are we more predisposed to employ a prophetic eschatology like is not found in Revelations, but is found in other threads in the scriptures, right? Like, is it up to us to get ourselves sorted out, or is it going to take God entering into history in a very literal, physical, third of stuff getting destroyed kind of way? I don't know for sure. But if you're asking like a frameworks, and I'm very much a both and, I think that John is specifically writing to, like that, I imagine that when John is sitting down with quill in hand writing on parchment, I'm sure that what is primarily occupying his brain is the very real persecution of the Christian church that he and his fellow Christians are experiencing. Remember, this guy's on Patmos. This guy's in exile actively, as he's writing this book, is in exile for his Christian faith. Like, he has been kicked out and stuck on a little penal colony island for being a Christian. Like, this stuff is real for him. This is lived experience. So I'm sure that's what's dominating his thinking. In that sense, I am in the preterist or the historical camp. But I also live in a world where sometimes I cry out to God saying, how long? How long is this nonsense going to be allowed to continue? I think it's both and. I do. I mean, that's sort of my thing, right? Because I think that John existed in a specific time and place, and that historical context is important for us to know and understand, because I think that's the context that he was speaking to. But if it no longer spoke to us in our present context, when you ask me to do a Bible study on Revelation, I'd probably just say, no, let's not, because it no longer speaks to us in our present context, right? The whole reason why Scripture is Scripture, right? Stories of the Bible are true, not because they happened at one point in history, but because they continue to happen